How can you change your physique in only 100 hours? That is the equivalent of only 2 training sessions per week of 1 hour each over the course of 1 year. Many of you don't have the time for long, frequent workouts, have different goals, or simply don't want to spend hours a day in the gym. I've had my times where I simply couldn't train as much and I had to find a way to spend less time in the gym but still keep the gains that I had. Today's video will answer that question. I want to answer the question of how can you and I spend as little time as possible in the gym and still make gains. I would advise you take some notes on this because there will be a lot of factors to remember. So within the fitness industry, we can identify two main camps regarding training. We have people who adopt a maximalist approach and others who adopt a minimalist approach. The maximalist approach to working out is when you try to maximize muscle growth and progress regardless of the time it takes you. If a 1 hour workout could get you 95% of the gains and a 2 hour workout could get you 100% of the gains, a maximalist would train for 2 hours. The minimalist approach to training is when you try to minimize the time you spend in the gym while still making as many gains as you can or maintaining what you already have. Now, most people in the industry will prioritize a maximalist approach, but I think there can be a lot of value in a minimalist approach, especially for the people who I mentioned at the beginning. Now, to give you an idea, here's the types of people who I believe should have a minimalist approach and what types of people shouldn't. People who should adopt a minimalist training style are the people who don't like the gym but still want to make gains or stay healthy. If you are that person, I do hope that at some point you start to enjoy training and it becomes part of your life, because training really is an enjoyable experience, but for now stick with minimalism. Second, people who don't have that much time. If you're very busy at school or at work and just don't have that much time, I think this can be a very smart approach. Then people who are beginners. As a beginner, you really don't need much volume to grow, and approaching training with a maximalist mindset will probably just leave you overtrained. Even some of the minimalist training methods that we'll discuss later on might be too much for a beginner. Now, as a more advanced trainee, you can still make use of a minimalist approach, but generally as you become more and more advanced, you tend to need more and more volume and training to maintain what you already have, and especially if you're trying to grow. The last category of people who could use a minimalist approach are more advanced trainees who care about focusing on other aspects of their life but still want to maintain the progress they've made. This is one of the main reasons that I adopted this form of training at some point. I wanted to focus more on school, YouTube and work, and I just couldn't spend as much time in the gym as previously. Now, the people who shouldn't adopt this training style are first people whose focus is currently on the gym and are trying to maximize the progress they're making. In this case, I would strongly advise not to do this. The second type of person who shouldn't follow this training style are people who have a hard time with intense workouts. Naturally, as you decrease the time you spend in the gym, you also decrease the volume you do, and if you decrease the volume, you need to compensate by increasing the intensity of the workout. So for people who have a hard time handling intenser workouts, I wouldn't advise this. So how much volume do you actually need to keep making progress in the gym or to simply maintain the progress you've already made? Generally, the advice given to maximize gains is to do 10 to 20 hard sets per week per muscle group, and it would be optimal to split those sets equally throughout 2 different workouts. So if you did 2 workouts per week and 12 sets in total, you would do 6 sets in one workout and 6 sets in the other. Now, this is to maximize gains, but what is the minimum amount of volume you can do to still make gains but not necessarily maximize them? There is a misconception in the fitness industry that more volume equals more gains, but that is far from being the truth. To make gains, you actually don't need that much volume. We know that 1 to 4 sets taken to failure per week can bring you about 64% of the gains. Doing 1 set to failure per week is basically nothing. You could do 1 set of lateral raises right now and have 64% of the gains. Now, if you do 5 to 9 hard sets per week, you would get 84% of the gains. Here you can already see diminishing returns. The more sets you do, the less extra gains you will get per extra set. Now, these numbers are averages, so on average people make 64% of gains with 1 to 4 hard sets per week. You might make slightly more or slightly less gains with that amount. Second, like I said, more advanced lifters need more volume to make the same amount of gains, so if you've been training for more than 5 years, you will tend to need more volume. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you need more volume, and many pro bodybuilders have proven that, but it tends to make you help make progress at a similar rate. Now, in order to maintain gains, you need even less volume. It is a lot easier to maintain gains than it is to build them. So for this, you can get away with 1 to 2 hard sets per muscle group per week. Now, with all this theory in mind, what are some minimalist training practices that you can implement into your own workout? First, we need to understand how muscle growth actually works. To grow a muscle, you need 4 variables: water, energy, protein, and a stimulus. we'll focus on the stimulus part because that is the one that is created within a workout. The stimulus we create on our muscles is done with 3 variables during our workout: frequency, intensity, and volume. You need to visualize those 3 components as interconnected. This means you will get to a point where you can't increase variables more, and therefore your body will start to compensate. At some point, if you increase one variable, you will need to decrease another. If, for example, you increase your volume too much, your intensity will naturally decrease. If you increase your intensity too much, your volume and maybe even frequency will decrease. If your frequency increases and your volume increases as well, your intensity will naturally decrease. These things are interconnected. Now, just because your body compensates when you increase one variable too much, doesn't mean it works the other way around. If you decrease your volume, your intensity will not necessarily increase, and you'll just have less stimulus on the muscle altogether. This is something you have to be careful of if you do decide to adopt a minimalist style of training. With minimalism, you will decrease the amount of volume and frequency you do, which will reduce the stimulus you put on your muscles, and they will therefore atrophy. To make sure we avoid this decrease in stimulus, we need to make sure we increase the intensity of our workouts. If the volume and frequency decreases, the intensity has to increase in order to keep the same stimulus or even increase the amount of stimulus. There's a couple of ways we can increase the amount of intensity we do in order to keep the same level of stimulus or even increase the stimulus we put on our muscles. First is to go to failure on all your sets. Failure is when you can't complete another rep despite maximum effort. If you're gonna decrease the amount of volume you do, that volume has to be high quality. Second is by adding partial reps after failure. Adding partial reps, which are incomplete reps after failure, can help you create more damage than if you would have stopped at failure. Then you can add something called drop sets. When you get to failure on a lift, you drop the weights by 25 to 50% and keep going right after. That way you can get an extra few reps and a stronger stimulus on the muscle. Then we can use supersets. This is when you combine 2 exercises in a row. The best way is to combine 2 antagonist muscles, not the same muscle. An example of antagonist muscle groups are your biceps and triceps. When one contracts, the other relaxes, and when the other contracts, the first one relaxes. Your chest and back are also antagonist muscle groups. What an antagonist superset would look like is, for example, once you're done with your exercise for biceps, you immediately follow with one for triceps. That way you can get work done for both muscle groups without wasting any time. Then we have a last technique which is called myo-reps. This simply consists of doing an exercise to failure, then waiting 10 seconds, and then trying to get another few reps. That way you basically go to failure 2 times in a row. These are the 5 ways you can increase the intensity of your workout to compensate for the reduction in volume and frequency. The second main part of a minimalist training style is finding ways to reduce the amount of time we spend in the gym, besides reducing the amount of volume we do. There's a few methods we can use for that as well. First, we need to cut down on our warm-up time. You don't need more than 5 minutes of cardio before a workout. 5 minutes is plenty to have blood flowing through your muscles and being ready for the workout. Second, you still need to progressively warm up on exercises themselves to avoid getting injured, but these are only warm-up sets, so you don't need to rest between those. For example, if you're benching 60 kilos for your work-in sets, you can do a first warm-up sets with the empty bar, then go up to 40 kilos and immediately do your second warm-up sets, then you go up to 60 kilos, and before doing that first work-in sets, you get to rest a little. You just don't need any rest between warm-up sets besides the time it takes you to change the weight. Third is to choose movements that need less warm-up sets. For example, on a squat you might need 4 or 5 warm-up sets before you get to your top weight, but on a hack squat you might only need 2 warm-up sets. By choosing exercises that need less warm-up sets, you're cutting the amount of time you spend in the gym by quite a lot, especially if you do this for every exercise. Fifth is to cut down on rest times. This is quite a big one, but one you need to be careful of. First is that if you tracked a normal workout, about 80% of your time in the gym would be spent resting, not lifting. So if you're able to decrease your rest time slightly, you'll be able to reduce your biggest time waster in the gym. Now, rest times are still very important to have between sets, but you can slightly reduce the amount of rest you have between sets over time. If one week you had a 2-minute and 30-second rest between sets, the next week you could go to a 2-minute and 15-second rest between sets. I would keep lowering that number until you get to 1 minute and 30 seconds, which I think is the limit that shouldn't be crossed since you still need adequate rest between sets. And then number 6 and last is to cut down on useless muscle groups. If you're gonna do a minimalist training style, I'm assuming the gym isn't your main priority in life, so cutting down on useless muscle groups can be very easy time savers. For example, ab training is one of them. Many people have these 10-minute long ab workout routines, when in reality, ab training isn't that necessary, especially if the gym isn't a priority. I mentioned in a previous video that training abs still had importance because they will be more visible if you train them, but if you just want them to be slightly visible, I would just completely cut out ab training. A second useless muscle group is specific forearm training. If you have a goal of getting big forearms, go ahead and train them. But really, they don't need much extra training, especially if, again, the gym isn't a priority for you. So this wraps up our complete list of ways to either increase the intensity variable of our workout or reduce the amount of time you spend in the gym. So that's it for this video. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. If making faster progress in less time is something you really care about, you can watch this video called "Become so good at training your body has to build muscle."